Before we get started on this wild thing tutorial, I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel, to like the video, and also hit the bell so you get notified whenever I post something new. And also, you can download the Yoga Flow Queen app and try out the membership. Hey there! I thought I wanted to do a video and talk about one of my favorite poses, wild thing. And wild thing is almost a little bit of a controversial pose, even though you might not think it is. But I have been to many workshops with yoga teachers who say that they do not teach wild thing because of what it can do to your shoulders. But I love wild thing, and I think that if you teach it the right way, there is no problem with that pose if you don't have a shoulder injury from the start, or if you know you have very sensitive shoulders. Then of course you need to do a variation and to be careful. But first, wild thing is called Camatkarasana in Sanskrit, and it actually is a pose that we can hear be called both wild thing, dancer's bridge, and flip dog. But I am a yoga teacher who wants to say that these are three different poses, and I always teach wild thing. I never teach flip dog, and I very rarely teach dancer's bridge. So first, let me show you what I personally think the difference is. When we talk about flip dog, you kind of hear it from the name that it is about flipping the dog over. And you see, this is where we can have, for me, this is where I can feel that there might be some issues with the shoulder here. And the dancer's bridge is more of a situation like this, where I have my entire pelvis and hips pointing straight up to the ceiling. So I come from more of this situation and do this, rather than coming in from a side plank and then having a tilted pelvis where one hip bone is higher than the other. And all of this needs to be adjusted with that back hand. So when I do dancer's bridge, I want my fingers pointing straight back, because that makes it easier for my shoulder, going like this. And when I do a regular wild thing, I would want my hand to be pointing maybe not straight back, because that will close in my shoulder and make it more of an internal rotation. What I want is to be able to go into an external rotation with the shoulder. So we have internal rotation and we have external. And in order to support that external rotation and the rotation in my elbow joint, I need that hand to be slightly rotated towards, not to my front body, but to the back body. So this makes it feel a lot nicer than if I go into here and then the rotation, the bottom hand is kind of preventing me to go into that nice external rotation that I like. So this is considered a back bend, but it's also requiring a lot from your shoulders, but also from your hip flexors. So when we go here, we have a nice long hip flexor stretch here, so it's good to warm up the hip flexor with some Anjaneyasana, or whatever your hip flexor stretch is your favorite. So make sure that both your hip flexors, your back side, and your shoulders and your chest is warm before you go into any wild thing. So what I call wild thing, and the version that I teach, is always taught from a place of where my hands are stacked over my shoulders. So maybe from starting off in some sort of a high plank and then into a side plank, still having that strong connection between my wrist and my shoulder, those like that line of stability there, and then flipping it over, lifting the hips, opening the chest, and going into wild thing. Compared to the flip dog, where we are in this position first and you start to flip over, you might come here and you can almost think that how unstable this becomes, when you have the point of gravity distributed so far away. You have like so much weight here, but you're having like this loose shoulder up here that needs to stabilize itself in this position, compared to here when you have stability down through your hands. You have that strong anchor down into the ground, and then it's easier to open up. So I never teach the flip dog. I always teach it from a high plank, stepping it back. And I love to do, the crossing under and then flipping it over. And I also love to do this little sink the hip motion, where you sink the hips and then you have some time to adjust everything before you open up. And then you pause it here a few times, which allows you to give it some more expansion and depth each time. But still keeping that connection, even though it doesn't need to be straight, but feel that there is stability from your wrist to your elbow, to your shoulder, to your serratus anterior, stabilizing your shoulder blades at the back. So if we think about what the hands and the feet are doing, the one hand is anchored down, and as always is a wide hand, and we're using the fingertips to push down, and that middle knuckle between your index finger and thumb is anchored down, as we always keep our hands in our practice when we anchor them to the floor. And then it's really good to have a good stability into your back foot. So make sure you have as much contact with the floor as you can into that foot. So if it's here, your hips are going to be heavier. You're going to put more weight into the hand compared to when you anchor the back foot down, the sole of the foot. You can push through that foot to rise. So it's a huge difference between being on the pinky toe edge and being on the sole of the foot. And the other foot, in reality, it can just hover there. You can bring your toes. You can pretend practice to grab hold of the foot. Then it turns into almost like a little dancer's bridge. So you can do all the variations. And the top hand can, of course, be up to the back, behind your skull. Any variation that you find works for you, and that gives you what you are after during that day and in that practice. And equally to the activation to your back foot, it is very important to push down through the front hand. As I said before, the activation in the hand needs to spread through your wrist, through your elbow, shoulder, and shoulder blade. So if you're just hanging here, like so, it's going to be hard on the wrist, it's going to be hard on all of your joints here. So you need to be active and push, push, push. Find that activation through your entire arm, from your fingertips and up, and not hanging. Super important to protect your joints. And then we can do some fun variations, of course. So let's say we're in wild thing, then you can bend the top leg and dip the back knee down, and then straighten the top leg and go back into wild thing, and dip it down and straighten up. And we have some fun transitions to do from wild thing, which of course the most natural one, still anchoring down through the back foot. You see how I bend into that knee to find stability to the sole of the foot, into some sort of a side plank. Maybe the full, and maybe from here practicing stepping forward with some grace to the top of the mat. So this is my little instructions for wild thing. I hope you had some good takeaways. Important to remember to push down through your points of contact, to lift your hips up, to anchor down through the back foot and the hand, push to protect your shoulders, and to always enter the wild thing from a side plank position where you're stacking your shoulder over your wrist rather than from a flip dog position. If somebody says to flip the dog, I suggest you go forward into high plank and you flip it over from there to protect your shoulders, because we all want to stay away from injury.